Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. Welcome back to the Spider-Man Iceberg. It's been a while. Let's change that. But before we do that, let's do a quick recap because, again, it's been a while. We are going through a Spider-Man Iceberg chart. How iceberg charts work is there are various tiers of information. They're categorized by rarity of people who are aware of things. It's like the old saying goes, like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Tier 1 was just the tip of the iceberg, as well as Tier 2, because that was still just on the surface, like the ice we could see above the water. But today, we're talking about Tier 3, the first layer of the Bummock. And by the way, fun fact, Bummock is the official term for all of the ice of an iceberg that is below the surface. So we're in the Bummock now. And in the past, I've tried to break down the iceberg videos for each tier into multiple videos so that they weren't like an hour and a half long. But that's not the case this time. No, this is a marathon viewing. We're going through the whole tier in one go. And it's mainly going to be auditory, so, don't worry, you can still do your chores or your homework or your taxes. I don't know, are there autumn taxes? Who's to say? So yeah, strap in for a good amount of content, a good amount of stuff to watch and or listen to. So let's get right into things, but before we do, I just want to say thank you so much for clicking onto this video. Thank you for giving me a chance and for sharing some of your precious time with me. I will do my absolute best to make sure that time is not wasted. So I do hope you like the video, but I will not ask you to like the video until you've watched the whole thing through, because I want to earn them likes. I want to earn them, I don't want to just ask for them. And on a similar thought, feel free to subscribe if you like my personality and if you're interested in seeing content like this only after you've actually seen the content that I do. So yes, while liking and subscribing is appreciated, please hold that till the end of the video and then make an informed decision from there, because I am a sucker for quality over quantity, and everybody here is quality. I don't know what I'm talking about. Like the video if you want to. Subscribe if you want to. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody who watches, whether they like it or subscribe it or not, I appreciate everybody here. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and I hope you have a good lunch. But yeah, let's get on with the video. Let's start with Obama. There once was a time where Barack Obama was being inaugurated as president. In the comics, for Barack Obama's inauguration, Peter Parker was the photographer for the Daily Bugle's coverage on the event. And Peter showed up, he was ready to take photos, he was taking photos, and he was in attendance just like anybody else. And just like everybody else, Peter Parker was surprised to see that Barack Obama was on the podium addressing the people, only for a second Barack Obama to swerve onto the scene with Secret Service, accusing the first Barack Obama of being an imposter. So naturally this leads to Peter Parker leaving and Spider-Man showing up shortly thereafter to basically run a couple of rounds of Barack Obama themed trivia to determine which one was the real Barack Obama and which one was the fake. And this worked. It actually worked. And the chameleon, master of disguise, frequent pain in Peter's side, was discovered to be the imposter for reasons that were probably addressed in the prologue, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh yeah, there was a prologue. This started out as a backup feature on Amazing Spider-Man number 583, if I'm remembering correctly. But then later on a prologue was published about the event in, I think it was like a President's Day special that involved like the prequel of the two Barack Obamas doing trivia issue. But yeah, it's a silly little thing. It was pretty fun. And I think Joe Biden almost spotted Spider-Man on the top of the George Washington Monument. But yeah, like I said, it was just a fun little thing. Speaking of fun little things, there's this fun little thing called fan theories. And one of these fan theories is that J. Jonah Jameson, the J. Jonah Jameson of all time, has from the very beginning known that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which is conceivable. I mean, you don't get to the level of the level of success that J. Jonah Jameson has gotten to without being aware and persistent and intelligent. And an aware, observant, and intelligent individual would feasibly be able to come to the conclusion that the teenager who has not even a simple portfolio to his name is somehow the only photographer in New York City that is able to get award level photographs of the wall-crawling menace himself. And this theory does kind of clash with certain iterations of J. Jonah Jameson, like the one that sued Peter Parker after his identity was revealed, the other version who was taken aback when he discovered that the Spider-Man who had been completely taken over by Venom in an alternate universe was Peter Parker, and then his mood or his attitude towards the menace drastically shifted. But it's also important to keep in mind that the Spider-Man comics on their own, let alone the entirety of Marvel Comics, does take place in a multiverse where literally anything is possible. Infinite possibilities. Which I suspect is like the argument that every hardcore comic book fan hates. Because it's, oh, but like that's not part of the canon. But it technically is, because you don't need to observe a multiverse for it to be true and for things to happen. And it is established that things take place in a multiverse, so everything has happened, technically. It's objectively correct and annoying, and I love it. It's my favorite counter-argument for bad faith nerds trying to like gatekeep and shut people down. So there you go. If you ever come across a wild gatekeeper that you want to annoy to high heaven, just say, but it's in the multiverse, anything is possible. And yeah, there is a universe where J. Jonah Jameson becomes Spider-Man, so the least we can treat ourselves to is theoretically there is a universe where Jonah was smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. But that also does beg the question, if it is the case that Jonah has always known that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, why didn't he ever say anything? Well, there could be a couple of reasons. First of all, J. Jonah Jameson, above all else, is a businessman, and he knows that getting those pictures for the Bugle to print stories about Spider-Man is good business. And if he rats out and exposes the only person who can get shots of him, aka Peter Parker, so that would be bad for business. So it's in his best interest, from a business standpoint, to play along with the ruse. And that's just surface level thinking. If we go deeper, it could be the case that in this instance, J. Jonah Jameson is aware that Spider-Man at the beginning was a teenager, and even if he has the best intentions, he's still a teenager, he could get things wrong. So Jonah, perhaps not wanting to be directly up in Peter's face, because he is a father, so he knows that's like the worst way to get your kids to listen to you, or to get kids to listen to you. So instead, he basically becomes Spider-Man's heel. He is the harsh critic, the devil's advocate that's saying, hey, yeah, Spider-Man is doing all this good stuff, but what about all the mistakes he's making along the way? Shouldn't he answer for those? Not necessarily as a means of discrediting or demonizing Spider-Man, but more so as a way of making sure he keeps his head on straight. Which, in a way, does work. We see in the Insomniac games, like the newest PlayStation games, that universe's Peter Parker does listen to Jonah's podcast, where it's nothing but him fear-mongering, not really fear-mongering, but just like bashing on Peter, or on Spider-Man, technically. He doesn't say anything about Peter. And he goes so far as to program it as like an automatic feature, or as like a default setting in Miles's gear, because he sees it as valuable insights. So who knows? Maybe Jonah does know in one universe or another, and maybe he is just as high-strung and critical as he is, and he's doing it as a service to Spider-Man and Peter. So once upon a time, in exactly one panel, Doc Ock refers to Spider-Man as Superman. This has no weight or implications on anything, I'm pretty sure, even the issue that the panel was printed in. Like, even like the story that line was spoken in, it had no weight to it. It was just a throwaway line, and it could be a couple of things. It could have been like high-level teasing or mockery that Doc aimed at Spider-Man, kind of like emphasizing how he is a superhuman man, but that's not likely. What's most likely is that it was a simple typo. I mean, there's no like quotation marks that really accent emphasis. I mean, it is written in bold, but also that's like just a common staple of comic dialogue in general, is just random bolding of certain phrases or letters. And typos were not uncommon. This was back in the time when analog technology was still being used to print comics and to type dialogue out in comics. There was no Grammarly, there was no spell check, there was no autocorrect. So it just meant that typos were more likely to not be caught before publishing. But I do like the alternative of like, this was like a galaxy brain level jab that just went over everybody's heads. Not because it was a good joke or it was like a high level joke, but just like the characterization of Doc Ock is so up his own farts about how smart he is that he injects it into like his quipping, but it just doesn't work. Like, it's not funny because he's too smart and too egotistical to be funny. Which luckily I'm not that egotistical. I am that unfunny, but at least it's not an ego issue. Peter Palmer was absolutely a typo. Like, it was 100%, that was just a mistype, misspelling situation. Because again, it wasn't that uncommon. But what's interesting about Peter Palmer's case, this specific typo, is that it would eventually become its own character. It kind of reminds me of like the story of Grey Hulk, because in the Hulk's first ever comic appearance, he was actually gray, not green. And this was entirely due to a printing error. The green ink turned to gray somehow, who knows. And while that was corrected later on and the Hulk was green after that, the Grey Hulk still existed. Like, that was a thing that still happened. And then time goes on, lore gets expanded, new stuff gets tried out, and the Grey Hulk actually becomes a character by the name of Mr. Fix-It. And Peter Palmer is a similar case. It was initially a typo that got expanded into an alternate reality version of Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. Speeding past a whole bunch of Spider-Verse lore, and if we haven't talked about Spider-Verse stuff yet, we'll get to it later, but basically what you need to know is that the mainline universe that the main Marvel story takes place in is Earth 616. However, like, right down the block from it is Earth 616 Beta, which is an alternate universe of the mainline story that's essentially frozen in time, hard-locked into the 1960s, which was the era that Peter Parker came on the scene. And as the name suggests, 616 Beta essentially acts as the first draft of the 616 universe, which also explains why it's frozen in the 1960s, since it's essentially meant to act as an early version of what would later become final product of 616. And once again, Peter Palmer is the Spider-Man of this universe. But what's even more fascinating is that it's not just one typo, it's a whole bunch of typos and errors that occurred in that time frame, at least roughly so. Not only is he named Peter Palmer instead of Peter Parker, but also he goes by Spider-Man instead of Spider-Man. He doesn't have the hyphen, it's just the one word, Spider-Man. And it's not just grammar either. He has a blue back insignia instead of a red one due to the one time where the color artist accidentally swapped those two. It's supposed to be a red spider on his back, but there was one time where an artist swapped the colors and it was a blue spider. And I really just find this so wonderfully silly, because it was either there was one guy who had all of this in his brain. He was like, oh, there's a couple of little previous Marvel printing errors that we can like throw into this, or the writing team for the story that introduced Peter Palmer had to go back and dig in the archives, aka look on the internet for people talking about it, to find all these errors and pick and choose which ones they could incorporate. Which either way must have been so fun. It must have been so fun to like find all these tiny little details and try to bring them all together into this new character. Or that could just be me being the not normal Spider-Man fan that I am. Stick to Walls Man is a pretty simple topic. It was one of the working early names for the character before Stan Lee finally stuck with Spider-Man. And the reason why it had to go through a couple of different names was because the initial inspiration that Stan Lee had for Spider-Man wasn't a spider, it was a fly on his wall. Because even such a galaxy-level creative mind like Stan Lee, who he was the guy who not only got us Spider-Man, but he also gave us the X-Men, the Incredible Hulk, the Fantastic Four. Like, he was one of the big minds that made Marvel what it is today. But even he was not immune to writer's block. And that's exactly what happened. He was in a bit of a fog. He had come up with all these different unique powers for the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. So when it came to making the next unique superhero, Stan Lee was kind of at a loss. He had to find something new. He had to find something unique, but he couldn't figure it out until he spotted that fly. He looked at that fly and thought to himself, gee, it'd be pretty nice if I can get a guy to do that. Like the image of a human being crawling up a wall like a spider does, or like a fly does, or like a bug does. And now you see where his head was at. Because Stick to Walls Man was not the only name. There was also Bug Man, Fly Man, Mosquito Man. To be fairly honest, Mosquito Man sounds like the worst villain ever. And not worst as in like a bad idea, but as in like, that is an Avengers level threat. We need to scorch Earth an entire continent if Mosquito Man is on there. Because Stan Lee also loved to tell the story of how the idea for Spider-Man was initially rejected, and one of the reasons why was because people don't like spiders. Imagine trying to pitch a superhero based on a mosquito. Nobody would have bought it. Everybody would have been like, that has to be a villain, or I can't believe it. But yes, while the legacy of Stick to Walls Man is pretty short and obscure, I still cherish it as a sort of like grounding reminder that even Stan Lee had tough days. He was not always knocking it out of the park. He wasn't always just knocking out humdinger after humdinger. He had to take some time to recharge and look around and find a new angle. Because it also reminds me of what Hemingway said. The first draft of everything is shit. And as somebody who makes a whole bunch of first drafts because I just keep getting ideas, and because I have a lot of creative friends, a lot of artist friends, I always think it's important to remember that the first draft is never meant to be the final draft. And just because something looks imperfect at the start does not mean it can't be perfect at the end. Now, some of the titles for these topics are a little vague, which is fine because literally who cares? This is just a fun little iceberg chart that I'm hedging my career on, but that's whatever. So sometimes I have to do a little bit of interpreting, and for me, with this topic, Spider-Man's origin being destiny, I think refers to the web of life and destiny. And the simplest way that I can put it, and I'm gonna try really hard because it has to deal with multiverses, the web of life and destiny is a way that connects one universe to the other, and it connects a lot of them. It's what the Spider-Verse is built off of. You know, the Spider-Verse, the thing that allows all these different alternate reality Spider-Men and women and animals and cars and spider things, spider concepts, if you will. All these different spider people are able to travel to one another's universe by writing the Spider-Verse, the threads of the web of life and destiny, or the Great Web. And how the web works is that there are these like cosmic spiders that go across the multiverse, and they do three things. They maintain the web, repair the web if it breaks, and expand it. And how they expand it is they leap off into oblivion until they land in an untethered universe. That spider, because again, it's a cosmic, magical, created by the spider goddess Neith, these divine spiders will land on an untethered universe and seek out a chosen person. That's where the destiny part comes in, because again, this is the web of life and destiny. So yes, this spider will find this chosen individual and make contact. This contact usually comes in the form of a spider bite, but it's not exclusive to spider bites. Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, wasn't bitten by a spider. His DNA was grafted with a spider, but that was enough. So yes, contact can be anything as long as it fits the writer's agenda. And then when contact is made, that person becomes a totem, a spider totem. Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Spider-Thing, whatever. So if we're talking about Spider-Man's origin being destiny or being destined, like he was destined to become Spider-Man, that is what that means, is that he is a spider totem, and by definition, that means he was chosen by destiny to become Spider-Man. If we're talking about Peter Parker, I vaguely know about how he was part of some greater prophecy, and it dealt with figures within the web. It was like the Scion and the Bride, which I know what the other is. I am aware of what that figure is. I am vaguely aware of what the Bride is. I have no idea what the Scion is. Like, I know the term of it vaguely, like not consciously, but I looked it up. I know what Scion means. It's like a descendant or something like that, but I don't know how it fits within this great web of life prophecy that was going on. And it doesn't matter. It does not matter. I've already answered the question. Spider-Man was always destined to become Spider-Man because that is what it means to be a spider totem in this greater web. End of essay. End of answer. On a completely different note, when Todd McFarlane initially pitched the character of Venom, he pitched it to be a woman. And to be clear, Todd McFarlane was not the one who pitched the symbiote who became the black and white suit. That was somebody else. But Venom as a character, after it was separated by Peter, or separated from Peter, that is the character that Todd McFarlane pitched. And initially, he pitched it as a woman who was bonded to the symbiote. And the reason why this woman would have such a strong, hatred and resentment for Spider-Man is because she would have blamed him for the death of both her husband and her unborn child. Which, alongside everything else I'm talking about, I encourage you guys, if you want to look further into it for the finer details, or ask me about it later, whatever you want to do. But for now, I would encourage you to research the finer details on your own time. But as far as I could say right now, Spider-Man did not kill anybody. He did not have the gun or knife or anything in his hand because he didn't do anything. It was just poor circumstance. But to be fair, I would not be saying this to female Venom's face, bonded or otherwise. That is a hard thing to try to remind somebody who is actively grieving the death of a family, their family. But yeah, it's definitely a lot more hardcore and severe of a story than Eddie Brock, which, even in the initial one, was still very petty. Petty at best, wrongfully assigning blame caused by his own hubris at worst. But speaking of which, that begs the question, how did we get from female Venom to Eddie Brock? Misogyny, of course, because it was literally just that. Todd McFarlane pitched female Venom. His editor, his boss at the time, said that it was a bad idea, it was dumb, because he gave a couple of reasons. But the most striking reason that I can remember is he basically said that nobody could believe that a woman would prove a threat to Spider-Man. Which, are you kidding me? First of all, it's not any woman off the street. It is a woman who is bonded with the alien symbiote that, by design, greatly increases the strength and durability of the host. Let alone the fact that this is the same symbiote that was bonded to Peter, knows his weaknesses, knows his identity, and best of all, is invisible to his spider sense. Like, the thing that gives Peter or Spider-Man an edge in every fight that he has. Not to mention the fact that strong, powerful, like superhuman women have existed in comics as long as comics have existed. Did he just not know about Wonder Woman? And I apologize for short-circuiting, but the mental gymnastics are very hard to keep track of. And again, it was literally just the fact that Venom was a woman. I doubt that it went exactly like this, but it basically went that Todd pitched the idea, the editor said no, Todd left the office, gave it a 10 count, turned back around, gave the exact same pitch, but just said, what if it was a guy instead? So then the editor was all on board with it, thought it was a great idea, and it's no surprise that Venom is jacked as hell. Even Eddie Brock, who was not like a soldier or a weightlifter or anything like that, he was a disgraced journalist when he bonded with the symbiote. He was just absolutely monster physique, solely because he was hitting the weights instead of going to therapy. So yeah, the absolutely contagious amounts of testosterone when you look at Venom was due to the fact that it was an overcorrection, because the original draft was not seen as suitable or believable. Made my peace with it. But hey, at the very least, now we have Black Widow who has the symbiote. So there is a powerful, traumatized woman who has the symbiote, and she's kicking ass with it. So eat it. That editor, I don't remember your name, and honestly, I choose not to. Okay, so this needs some context. So back in the time when companies about fun things were still having fun, Marvel and DC, despite the fact that they were technically competitors, still collaborated a lot. Much to our benefit as the audience, since we not only got stories where Marvel heroes would interact with DC heroes, but there were also instances where the two heroes would merge together in the Amalgam universe, to be specific. And again, we covered that in a previous video. If you would like to know more about that, go watch those videos. If you do, I greatly appreciate it. But during one of the instances where worlds collided instead of merged together, there was a time where Peter Parker did meet Clark Kent. This was due to a big technology event, like this big fancy satellite was being launched, and both the Daily Bugle and the Daily Planet needed their best guys, respectively, to cover this big old groundbreaking story in technology and science. It just so happened that the Daily Planet's best reporter happened to be Superman, and the Daily Bugle's best photographer happened to be Peter Parker. And in this story, through a big old hullabaloo of circumstance, Lex Luthor and Dr. Octopus team up, and with their minds put together, they orchestrate a series of events that causes Spider-Man and Superman to initially get in a big old tussle. So they initially fight until they stop for long enough to actually talk things through and then decide to work together, which I swear, it was like a legal obligation for superheroes. You had to swing first and ask questions later, only if you were fighting another superhero that you weren't like best friends with. And then subsequently, after you save the day, you forge this like ironclad, unbreakable bond of friendship and everything, which I'm not complaining about. Spider-Man's best friends with Superman. That's a win for me. But yes, Superman and Spider-Man do fight. They save the day, save the world. Lex Luthor and Doc Ock... How do I finish the sentence? Failed. Lex Luthor and Doc Ock failed thanks to Spider-Man and Superman saving the world. Oh my god. And afterwards, the epilogue of the whole story is that Peter and Clark get some really good, cool, awesome footage of Superman and Spider-Man fighting. and they get a whole bunch of brownie points with their bosses because of it. So much so that their respective bosses treats them by paying for their dinner, like saying like dinner's on me tonight as a treat for the goodest little boys, the goodest little photographer and reporter. And the two decide to go on a double date because it just so happens that both MJ and Lois Lane were also involved in all this hullabaloo, which I believe is the second time I've said hullabaloo in this video. It's a fun word, I like it. And last but not least, another fan theory that has been all but confirmed at this point: Peter Parker is Jewish. Now, I do say all but because Stan Lee never explicitly said that Peter Parker was meant to be a Jewish person. He does say that there was a lot of influence from Jewish stories, specifically the story of King David, mainly because King David as a character, like if we're just looking at it as literature and we're taking all the religious context out of it, the story of King David was, especially in the early story, was characterized by King David having blessings bestowed upon him without him asking. And just because he'd had these blessings thrust upon him, he then had to deal not only with those blessings, but also the duty and obligations that came with them, or the responsibilities. So while Peter's religious identity has always been vague, especially in the comics, there is a good wealth of potential evidence for the case of Peter as a Jewish person. As I mentioned, there is the fact that he was inspired by King David. Also, his humor has been recognized by Jewish members of the film and entertainment industry that have recognized that his sense of humor is very much coded as Jewish. There is a lot of self-deprecation, there is a lot of using humor as a means of processing grief or guilt. So his humor, alongside a bunch of other stuff, just ingrained in his character. A lot of people have drawn parallels to Jewish culture. Even the people involved in Spider-Man projects have recognized these. In case you don't know directors' names, Sam Raimi is the original Spider-Man trilogy, Mark Webb is The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. And when it came to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, Avi Arad, or Arid, I'm gonna stick with Arad because that feels more natural, but I could be wrong, so shoot me if I am wrong. Mr. Arad, executive producer on Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3, and a Jewish person, said himself that Peter Parker is Jewish, and this was backed up by Sam Raimi, as well as pretty much everybody who was Jewish that was involved in the project, including the writer for Spider-Man 2, who was the first person, or is recognized as the first person, to coin the idea of Peter Parker as what is known as a crypto-Jew, which that term refers to Jewish people who only practice their faith in private, but in public they either present as a different religious or secular identity, or just a religious or religiously ambiguous. But basically, due to external, usually political or societal pressures, they prefer to keep their faith ambiguous and just focus on practicing in private. And Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is no different. Andrew himself said that his version of the character is Jewish. And Andrew Garfield is Jewish on his father's side. But anyway, in summary, outside of Stan Lee himself directly saying, yes, that man is Jewish, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that Peter Parker may be Jewish. Not just in movies and in the abstract inspirations, but also Peter's identity, or religious identity, has been subtly hinted at throughout his history in the comics. But yes, as somebody who is not Jewish, who was raised in church, who was raised Christian, I'll be the first to say, I actually would prefer Peter is Jewish. I think it makes the character very interesting. I also don't think it overrides his history or anything like that. I just think it's a neat little detail that encourages diversity and wider understanding of people. And that's kind of a big point of Spider-Man Like, he's always been an outsider. He's meant to be different. He's meant to be distinctly different from others, and that's one of his greatest strengths. And that strength kind of transfers onto other people because they get more well-versed. So it makes more sense. And really, to absolutely put a pin in it, I don't think it's that big of a deal for it to become like a big discussion. Like, I remember it was like a big, huge topic when Superman's son, Connor Kent, when he was confirmed to be bisexual, which again is an instance of like, yeah, that's cool, that's diverse, that's like that's a new thing. But there was a lot of people that were mad about it on the internet for one reason or another. But at the end of the day, who cares? It's the same character. It does not conflict or contradict anything about the characters. It's just a fun bit of inclusion. So yeah, that's the real big takeaway of this. If you are weird and you are either like confused or like you're really defensive about including groups that are not like conventionally, not to use this term, but I'm going to use this term, straight white male Christian, then I'd encourage you to look inside yourself and ask yourself why you're reacting this way instead of just reacting that way publicly on the internet. In the 1990s, James Cameron was approached by Carolco Productions with the offer to act as both the writer, producer, and director for a high-budget live-action Spider-Man blockbuster film. And after Carolco managed to acquire the production rights for Spider-Man due to a deal that they made with Canon Films, which is a part of a larger collective called the Canon Group, which I'm like 80% sure is not a thing anymore. And some of that percentage is influenced by the fact that Carolco isn't a thing anymore, because they filed for bankruptcy in like the middle of the decade. Around 1995 or 1996, they straight up filed for bankruptcy because they had been dealing with some legal and financial issues even before the Spider-Man project was even a thought. And because of Carolco's bankruptcy, there was not a lot of progress that was made in the production. I mean, a lot of pre-production was done, I'm sure, but actually capturing footage and even like really solidifying like chosen actors, there's nothing there. Nada. Nothing, not one single bit of anything. However, if I'm remembering correctly, James Cameron was not being paid right off the bat. Carolco actually required James Cameron to submit at least one copy of a screenplay before they would agree to start paying him for his work, which I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. All I know is that that's what Carolco did, and Carolco doesn't exist anymore. So when it comes to the first draft that James Cameron submitted, it was more so a draft that he basically co-signed on, that a different team had written more than he did. Let me rephrase that. It's likely that a team of writers wrote out the script with minimal input from James, and James signed off on it so that he could submit anything, so that he could start being paid anything. However, in just a few months, he did submit a revised script, or scriptment, which I googled it. I still don't know what the difference between a script and a scriptment is, like, significantly so. So don't worry, we're all clueless here. So as far as the public knows, there are two different versions of the James Cameron Spider-Man script, and the best part about it is they're both free to access online. And surprising no one, I read through the entire second draft, mainly because I believe that the second draft is more likely to be more indicative of what James Cameron's vision for the character and his story is, or was. And I'm probably gonna read the first draft eventually. Like, I read through the first couple pages, but then the second script is something else. And by that, I don't necessarily mean it's enchanting or enthralling. It's, how do I put this politely? James Cameron's script, his vision for a Spider-Man story, more closely resembles the sci-fi horror genre that he was comfortable with, or more comfortable with at the time, than an actual bona fide Spider-Man story. And again, I could go on and on and on even further about it, but that is not what this video is about. And if I go down that rabbit hole right here, right now, we're gonna be here forever. So to put it as briefly and oversimplified as possible, James Cameron's Spider-Man is a story about a teenage boy who believes he's turned into a freak, rather than the young man that made mistakes and is now perpetually trying his best to make up for those mistakes out of a sense of responsibility. It's just a very steep change in the character and in the sentiments of the story, and in just the story details themselves. Because there are some details that either just there's no point in altering them, or they actually negate the significance of Spider-Man's story. First of all, the spider that bites Peter isn't radioactive, it's mutagenic. It's, like, contaminated with this experimental or, like, you know, sci-fi mutagen thing. Because remember the Ninja Turtles? That was a cool thing in the 90s. So there's the example of, did you really need to change this? Because it doesn't really feel like it's changing much. But if we're talking about an example of a change in the script that's actually a detriment to Peter's comic accurate character, it would be when the script literally says Uncle Ben and Mary Jane try their best, but they're too much of old farts to actually be like significant moral guidance for Peter Parker, which just completely overlooks the purpose of both May and Ben. Like, ridiculously so. And we see how that has a negative effect on Peter, because he's written to be like a Redditor in the screenplay, because again, he's not listening to his elders. It's so dumb. But yeah, once again, I am really fighting back the urge to keep going on about this, because once again, I will in the future, but just I can't do it here. So yeah, just stay tuned for that. And on a less detailed note, Michael Jackson was this close to buying Marvel in its entirety just so he can play Spider-Man. Because as the story goes, Michael Jackson was a huge Spider-Man fan. So huge, in fact, that he wanted to play the character in a live-action film. However, unlike most people that want to play Spider-Man, like in a movie, Michael Jackson was probably the only person who had enough fame, money, and fame to actually pull it off. Because again, he was really close. He was in legitimate negotiations, actual like business discussions with the execs at Marvel to buy the company. He even had Stan Lee's approval. Stan Lee was all on board with Michael Jackson being the owner and CEO of Marvel Comics. But despite all of these advantages that Michael Jackson had, the fame, the money, the endorsement, the fame, the money, the conversation would just abruptly end. The negotiations would fall through, and Michael Jackson never got the chance to either own Marvel as a company, or to play Spider-Man in a live-action capacity, or I think in any capacity. I don't think Michael Jackson voice acted any characters either. In the end credits scene, or in the early versions of the end credits scene for Iron Man 1, Nick Fury mentions a couple of interesting characters, at least vaguely. When he's talking to Tony about how he has enough to deal with on his plate, and he has all this stuff to worry about as the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., he mentions A, mutants, B, gamma accidents, and C, radioactive bug bites, which are obviously tongue-in-cheek references to the X-Men, the Incredible Hulk, and our favorite guy, Spider-Man. However, there was a big problem with this writing, mainly the fact that neither Sony, nor Universal, nor Fox agreed to this, like, at all. Because at this point, Marvel was still leasing out the production rights to Spider-Man to Sony. They had long since sold the X-Men to Fox, and they had sold the Incredible Hulk to Universal. And again, this was Iron Man 1. The MCU was not established, and the profitability of the MCU was not proven yet. So logistically speaking, Marvel, if they had like not revised this line, would have basically be putting 3 of their competitors on the hook to include fan favorite characters in their little cinematic universe project. Which, if I were a betting man, I would wager that probably wouldn't swing right with their competitor. I think if anything, it would just make them a tad peeved, to say the least. I also think it would have impacted like the potential success of the MCU, because one of the big appeals, especially in like phase 1, was that it was a slow burn. You had all these individual stories that eventually started to, wrap together and intertwine. But if they had kicked things off on such an immediate note of like, oh yeah, we have Iron Man, and also Spider-Man, and also the Hulk, and also the X-Men, then it would have felt very cash grabby, which has been a common pratfall for other cinematic universe attempts from other companies, like Universal. But that is a different conversation for a different day. Sam Raimi's original design for the Green Goblin was far more comic accurate, to say the least. Raimi had gone so far as to hire Amalgamated Dynamics, a special effects company, to create a wearable animatronic mask for the Green Goblin. That way the Green Goblin would have a far more like fleshy, surreal, uncanny like face mask, similar to the kind of stuff he has in the comics. And they hired the right people for the job. Amalgamated Dynamics has a veteran history when it comes to animatronics and special effects makeup. Like, if you look into like the history of their work, they have been a part of all of it. However, that did not change the fact that this incredibly sophisticated, incredibly advanced wearable animatronic was very difficult to deal with, solely because it was a very complicated machine. And not only that, but it also took at minimum 8 hours to properly fasten it onto an actor. Meaning that theoretically, they could have like spent 8, 9, 10 hours even onto just gluing this thing down to a person, and then like rehearsing and practicing the motor controls and all that stuff. And all it would take is one little rotor, one little gear, or one little shaft to like loosen or jimmy out or completely dislodge, to completely render the device useless until it could be repaired, which means that they would have to delicately unfasten the device from the person, which itself could take hours. And then they would have to flip it around, flash a light on it, and then perform animatronic surgery, which in and of itself could take a good chunk of time. And then they spend another 8 hours to put the mask back on the person, only for something else to break. And it does not help that at this point they still had yet to cast somebody as Norman Osborn, meaning they still had to do auditions, and there was no way in hell that they were going to try to juggle like 10 to 20, even 5 actors, and try to fit them all in, give them like 10-hour audition time slots. Because best case scenario, even if it is just 5 actors that they're auditioning, and if everything goes right, which it never does, if everything goes right and it just takes the minimum 8 hours, that's still a total of 40 hours in auditions just to prep the actor visually. So instead of all that, Raimi asked Amalgamated Dynamics to make a more simplified audition mask. And that simple static like helmet design was the design that ended up being used in the final product. And I have little doubt that Willem Dafoe's performance or his audition, where he certainly was able to draw out like the wide crazed goblin eyes and like that sinister grin through the mask, which would not have been possible or like visible. That's the word I'm looking for. Visible if they had gone the animatronic route. I genuinely believe that Raimi and the casting team were all like, listen, like this helmet is far more simple, but also we gotta give the animatronic a shot. Unless we get like a sign from God himself that we need to go a different direction, only for Willem Dafoe to pull this face in the auditions. I mean, yeah, that's a sign from something that you have to go like, okay, we're gonna go simple. And lo and behold, the less comic accurate version of the Green Goblin suit is, in its own respects, still iconic. Thanks in large part to the fact that we can actually see Willem Dafoe's face, like his eyes and his teeth, while he's wearing the mask. So yes, that just goes to show the power that an actor with a powerful aura can hold in the final product of a film. That and the inherent human instinct to simplify every process ever. For The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Shailene Woodley was cast as Mary Jane Watson. She was originally going to have a bit of a background role, essentially establishing the character's existence in the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. And the original plan was that she would make her debut in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and then for The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and then even the Sinister Six spin-offs that were planned, those films would be the stage at which the relationship between MJ and Peter would really blossom. However, for one reason or another, these shots were cut from the final product. Most likely to save time, because objectively, with all the stuff that they were trying to do in that film, when it came down to asking the question of what can we cut from this movie and still have the movie make any amount of sense, the soft, slow burn introduction of a character that does not have any immediate significance in the story being told at the moment is a pretty attractive one to cut. However, this might have been a blessing in disguise, because even if the Amazing Spider-Man franchise was not cut short when it was, because in 2014, Shailene Woodley said that she was not sure if she would be returning to the role as Mary Jane due to her commitment to the Divergent films. Because in 2014, Shailene Woodley, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, said she wasn't sure if she would be reprising her role as Mary Jane Watson, citing her dedication to the Divergent films as a possible factor in all of that. You guys remember home DVDs? Are they still a thing? Well, in the home video settings for Into the Spider-Verse, you can go to the special features menu, remember that too? And in the special features, there is something called the alternate universe mode, or alternative universe mode. And this mode was essentially a supercut of all of the early scripts and drafts and storyboards and unfinished scenes and everything involving the early version of the Into the Spider-Verse story, which proved to be very different from the final product that we got. One of the big differences is that Genki was established right at the beginning, because in Into the Spider-Verse, Genki is introduced as Miles's new college roommate, or like charter school roommates. But in the alternative universe mode, it shows that Genki was originally going to adhere to the dynamic in the comics, which would be they were childhood best friends, and yeah, they were childhood best friends. So when Miles gets bitten by the spider, which in this version would have been at school rather than in the subway station, or the subway tunnels rather, it would be Genki who tries to help Miles learn how to become Spider-Man or become a superhero, which would lead them to try to learn by studying the Spider-Man motion picture, which was a fictional movie within the universe of Spider-Man, which was very intentionally like framed to be a like over glamorization or like sensationalization of Spider-Man's life story. It's like how a large criticism of a lot of biopics is that they augment the finer details of historical events in like a musician or a band's life to make the movie more exciting or more sellable, really. It's kind of like that, because keep in mind, Spider-Man did exist in this universe. He totally existed. He was a guy, he was a superhero, and somebody somehow managed to make a movie about his life without him, or like without his say. And while there are far more differences and while there are a lot more varying different details in this like larger compilation of early materials, too much to get into right now, there are a couple that I would like to point out. For example, there are mentions to both Alchemax and Roxxon, which are two companies that are established as like big players, or like we also get a little bit of more context about the gala, like the Spider-Man themed gala that Wilson Fisk hosts. Because first we learn that it's meant to be like a gala in honor of Spider-Man, who has died at this point. And we also learn by how Fisk is talked about and how he's referred to as like a great philanthropist, that at this point his universe did not know that he was the Kingpin. Like, he was able to keep a pretty good lid on things. But truly one of my favorite scenes that was included in this alternate universe mode is the interaction between Miles and Peter. Like Peter B. Parker. Because it is the classic, like, the weight of the world and the weight of having to save the world is like laid heavy. It's like Miles can feel the weight of it on his shoulders, and that's overwhelming to him, and he's filled with doubt. He is not sure if he can do this, and he asks Peter, like, how can I possibly save the world? And that's when Peter tells him the secret on how to do it, which is that you can't think about saving the whole world, because nobody can save the world by themselves. What you have to do is think about saving one person. The one person that matters most, that is the one that you are trying to save. Which I don't know how to like better explain it, or like to wax even more poetic about it, but like there's something about that train of thought of like, don't worry about saving the world, focus on saving one person. And that's what is the motivation that allows you, that grants you the ability to save the world. I don't know, it just it appeals to a very like deep emotional aspect of myself that I can't put into words because reasons. But yeah, the alternate universe mode, animatics and all are very fascinating, and I think there's like a total runtime of like 2.5 hours, maybe like very nearly 3 hours total, which is far more than the theatrical release. And that's like an entirely different story. They're two different stories. It just really goes to show just how much time, energy, and thought has gone into the Spider-Verse project. And if nothing else, this should be the reminder of be patient. They're gonna release the release date for Beyond the Spider-Verse when they can, and they're trusting us to trust them. So let's do that, and let's just talk about Spider-Man while we wait. So there is a story within this story that's actually a bigger story than the original topic, and that is the fact that Tobey Maguire was nearly fired from being Peter Parker. To put it briefly, there was a professional rift that was created between Tobey and the executives at Columbia that is believed to have been caused by a mishap in communication between the executives and Tobey Maguire's representation. And the most focused on point of the discussion that led to this rift was Tobey's representation mentioning the fact that Tobey had a back injury that he had developed somewhere between Spider-Man 1 and Seabiscuit. And Tobey's representation mentioned this, whether it was for securing accommodations for the actor or if it was simply for leveraging a higher pay for Tobey reprising this role. There's really no way for me as a nobody on the internet to determine that with any degree of certainty. But what I do know is that the back injury was mentioned, and this led, for one reason or another, led the executives at Sony to push for the decision to replace Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. And to give credit where credit is due, Sam Raimi did say that it was like the last thing he wanted to do, replace Tobey Maguire, but that he was willing to do so if it meant protecting Tobey Maguire's safety. Because he's publicly stated how his big concern in all of this was that how could he make this story about responsibility and about doing right and doing the right thing, while also simultaneously potentially putting an actor's health at risk just so that he didn't have to find a new actor. And this led to the execs at Columbia to draft a short list of actors that could potentially replace Tobey. And one of those names was Jake Gyllenhaal. And Jake got the call. He got a call and he got like a brief rundown of the situation and that he could potentially be called in for an audition. However, Tobey heard about this. He heard about what the executives were doing and he was like, dear God, I cannot lose this. I cannot let this happen. So he apologized, he pulled a few strings, he said he would be willing to do anything and everything to secure his job, and as we all know, he did. Because the executives relented, and everyone agreed that Tobey should be allowed to reprise his role, only if he A, submitted to medical testing, and B, if that medical testing confirmed without any doubt that he was physically fit to perform as Spider-Man. And he did, he got a clean bill of health, and he got right back into the swing of things. Yes, pun intended. And potentially the best part for all of the hardcore Taylor Swift fans that might be watching this, the person who got screwed over the most in all of this was Jake Gyllenhaal, because after that initial call, he essentially got ghosted. So yeah, just an interesting behind-the-scenes story of the complicated process of being an actor in Hollywood, I guess. And even if you don't care about all that, you still got a 2-for-1 special with this topic, so you're welcome. Spider-Man the Animated Series was an animated series about Spider-Man that ran for 5 seasons. And supposedly, the only reason why the series ended at 5 seasons was because of a heated dispute between Avi Arad and the executive of Fox Kids, or the head of Fox Kids, whose name I fail to remember at this moment. It was such a huge fight that the head of Fox Kids was like, you know what? Screw the animated series. You're getting canceled. Now, I don't know for 100% if that is why the series got canceled, but what I do know is that it wasn't due to a lack of ideas. John Semper Jr., the producer and writer, or one of the producers and writers for the series, had a whole bunch of ideas that could have potentially been whittled down into a full 6th season of episodes for the animated series. And while there are too many ideas to list here cleanly, there are a couple of highlights that I'd like to mention. First of all, a brief spoiler warning, because a couple of the ideas were the return of a couple of pre-established villains, such as Mysterio, who was believed to be dead at this point in the series, as well as Norman Osborn, who had at this point been trapped in limbo, which is like an actual plane of existence within the reality of the show. Yeah, he was stuck in limbo. But that was not all. Oh, far from it. Because there was also going to be a lot of arrivals, both villainous and heroic. Spider-Man villains like Beetle and Sandman and Puma and Jack-o'-lantern would have been introduced into the show. I'm not sure if Puma is exclusively or originally a Spider-Man villain, but Puma's there. And that's just for street-level villains. There also would have been an episode, or there could have potentially been an episode that involved Dormammu. And all you need to know about Dormammu is that he's big, scary, and he is a cosmic-level threat. And that is actually a great segue for the next point, which is there was plans for a couple of heroic guest appearances, such as Ghost Rider, who Spider-Man would have to team up with to stop Dormammu and potentially save the Earth, because it's Dormammu. And other heroic guest appearances would have involved the Hulk, as well as Iceman and Firestar, who those two are interesting because there's more history there. And that history was Spider-Man and his amazing friends, which, believe it or not, involved Spider-Man fighting crime alongside his amazing friends, Iceman and Firestar. But yes, the long and short of it is, this is another example of creative minds or creative heads for Spider-Man projects basically having their time cut short only due to stuff beyond their creative capabilities. Like, their imagination was not the limit here. And now, last but not least, we're on to the wacky world of video games. Now, for Spider-Man on the PlayStation 1, there were a couple of different cheat codes that you could put into the cheat code menu. Some of these cheat codes did things like unlock unlimited webbing for Spider-Man, as well as unlock a hidden, level select menu. But the one we're focusing on today is more so a feature of the menu itself rather than its own unique password for, another feature. Basically, if you were to go into the menu and type in a naughty word, a swear word of some kind, then a tiny Spider-Man would come up from the bottom of the screen and punch the profanity out of your entry, and in kind replace it with a more wholesome alternative word, such as donut, lobster, or bunny. In Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, you could unlock Spider-Man as a playable character if you 100%ed the career mode using a custom skater. I know those were a lot of words, and I know some of them may not have made complete sense, but what's important is you could play as Spider-Man in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. And it wasn't just another skater skin. He had unique tricks, such as the Spidey Flip, the Spidey Grind, and of course the does whatever a spider can. I believe Spider-Man was also the only character in Pro Skater 2 that had 4 distinct costumes to choose from, because you could choose between either the classic blue and red, the iconic black and white, and also 2 lesser known costumes, the Mark I spider armor, as well as the Captain Universe suit, which there is too much lore behind both of those things to get into right now, but trust me, it's cool. And what's even cooler is, like I said, it's not just a Spider-Man costume for a skater to wear. No, Spider-Man as a skater had its own unique animation skeleton, which, the best way I could explain that is, you know how action figures have different, shoulder and elbow joints? But that also depends on the action figure we're talking about. Some action figures only have the shoulder joint but not the elbow joint. Some of them have both, some of them have neither. And when it comes to animating these 3D models of skaters, practically all of the skating animations and all that stuff only needed the animation equivalent, or the skeleton equivalent of a shoulder joint, but not necessarily an elbow joint. But for Spider-Man, they made a new armature with elbow joints, relatively speaking, so that Spider-Man can pull off these unique tricks that only he could. Not just because he's Spider-Man, but also because his like animation rig is literally built different from the rest. And in case you're wondering, how did they get away with this? Like, how did Pro Skater 2 get away with using a Marvel, like a licensed copyrighted character? Well, it's because the two games share a developer. Neversoft developed both Pro Skater 2 and Spider-Man for the PlayStation. Pro Skater 2 is even mentioned in the Spider-Man game. Spider-Man can swing by a billboard that's promoting Pro Skater 2 and he will say, hey, I skated with that guy once. So naturally, if Neversoft is already working with Marvel to make a video game from the ground up, of course they would have the materials to include Spider-Man in another video game, especially for a video game that is not selling itself as another Spider-Man game. It's the spectacular Spider-Man effect. Neversoft may not have the production rights to develop Spider-Man video games that expand Spider-Man's story, but they do still hold the rights to their professional designs. So while they can't expand on the lore of PlayStation Spider-Man, or PlayStation 1 Spider-Man to be more precise, they can still use the likeness of Neversoft Spider-Man because they're Neversoft. What are they gonna do? Sue themselves? And it's not like Marvel can sue them either because they don't own those designs. Neversoft does. Which also explains why Spider-Man unfortunately did not return for the Pro Skater 2 remake for the next generation. I think it was for like the Xbox 360. Basically, the remake for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 was not developed by Neversoft, so the developer did not have the ability to use those assets because they belong to Neversoft. So yes, it's just the quirky little fun thing of legal logistics being bent to their absolute limit, and we, the audience, get to benefit from it. And that'll do it for the third tier of the Spider-Man Iceberg. It has been far too long since I posted previously, and I'm happy that I'm actually able to try to get back into the saddle of things. And now that I've figured out, like, a rhythm or like a system or a method to do all this stuff, it bolsters my confidence even more that I'm actually able to continue doing this consistently. And I know that at this point it does not matter super severely since I have less than 50 subscribers at the moment, let alone less than 100, less than 1,000. 1,000 would be crazy. But at the end of the day, no matter if it's 19 or 20 or however many, this is still fun. And I am glad that people are watching this. And I'm really going to try hard to focus on this as my primary project, because I got a bunch of them. Not just in my personal life, but also like in regards to Spider-Man content that I post publicly. I got a lot of ideas. I've got like the Spider-Man Deluxe project that I'm like kind of toying with on my Instagram. I've tried to do like short form stuff so I can post more frequently, but I'm failing to do that, but who knows, who knows what's gonna happen with that. Over on my TikTok, but also once again, like now that I know what I'm doing to some extent, I've actually been really excited to get back into making like YouTube videos. So yeah, stick around here for either the upcoming Spider-Man Iceberg videos, as well as like random topic videos, mostly about Spider-Man, sometimes about other stuff, but equally yappy, because I am a natural born sucker. So if you are a fan of the yap, then feel free to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it, but only if you really liked it. That's going to be about it for this video, but as always, stay happy, stay healthy, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.